Hello, gentle reader. Thank you for being with us today for this fourth of the beer sessions. Um, Today, we are going to do a conversation around a great Indian national passion, and that is chess. Okay, I have played chess in a minor way in my life. Amit has played chess much more seriously and much better than I ever did. And Amit has thought deeply about 200 years of chess and its evolution and the rise of chess in India. And at the end, I want to ruminate on what the rise of chess in India means for the possibilities of India and what it does not mean, and to think about a spectrum of cognitive complexity of various kinds of problems. Okay, so let's get started. Amit?
Ajay, I have told you in the past, you have to undersell and overdeliver. Now you have oversold and we will definitely underdeliver. So, gentle reader, I am not an expert in the game. I have like deep passion and non-deep expertise in the game. I used to play seriously in college at the age of 19. I retired when I realized that I can't be an Anand. And at that time in the early 90s, if you can't get to Anand level, you can't really make a living from the sport. So I left it, but I followed it keenly over the years, especially in the last few years. And there are really three sports that I follow really closely now. One of them is chess. And the thing with any sport, when you follow it, is that it's not so much about the sport itself, but the narratives around the sport, the drama around the sport, the history of the sport, the human stories in the sport. And a lot of us are celebrating because Gukesh Romaraju has reached the World Championship final, and that's an incredible achievement, and I'm going to put it in context very soon. And we are celebrating that for a lot of Indians, it's a nationalistic thing, ki haan, an Indian in the final, and that's a good reason. We are patriots, we love our country. But what I want to try and do through the episode is communicate some of the stories that are in the sport, give you a sense of history, give you a sense of context, so we can appreciate Gukesh's achievement a little bit more. And we kind of get a lot of the drama that often simmers behind the scenes. And I have to clarify, I'm not an expert on the game. I'm not a great player. My rating on chess.com is max around 2000 elo, so it's not by no means up there, but I follow the game closely. And my idea is to people who kind of know the broad details ki haan ye ho raha hai, but what is chess really like? What is the world championship like? What does it involve? Aren't computers going to take over the game? Humans kya kar rahe hai? I want to give context on that. So for an expert player who's already deep into the game, there won't be much to really talk about.
Okay, Amit, let's get started at the history, the deep story that take us from the beginning.
So I want to start by talking about the World Championship itself. Right, chess in the 19th century was a very unorganized game. Some games that were played, from those centuries by Adolf Anderson, Paul Morphy have kind of traveled down to us. But actually, by modern standards, they're pretty poor games. The opponents played really poorly, so they could do spectacular things. In modern chess, you'll never see anything like that. And there was no chess organization. It was very unorganized. You had sort of word of mouth about so and so player in America is good, so and so player in London is good, and so on and so forth. Sometimes there would be tournaments. Top players would come from different places, and there'd be a halo of legend around it. So the World Championship, as we know it, we think of it as starting in 1886. But what really happened was that the idea was that let's get top players together and figure out who are the best players, and let's figure out a way to crown one of them the world champion. So in 1883, there was a great tournament in London, which was comprehensively won by a gentleman named Johannes Zukertort. He won by 3 points, and Wilhelm Steinitz came 3 points below him, and he was second, and the two of them played a match, and this happened in 1886, and Steinitz beat Zukertort. And that's it. He proclaimed himself the world champion. And even though random people had said about so and so that best player in the world, world champion, in widespread recognition, this is considered to be the first time that someone has been accepted by the community as the world champion, and that's Steinitz. Steinitz also played a match with Adolf Anderson 20 years before this in 1866. But and some people claim world championship was that, but actually वैसा कुछ नहीं था. That's considered unofficial by some people. He got the world championship in 1886. Now at this point, remember, there's no organization. There's no set mode that this is a procedure by which a world championship happens. He has a title, it's very much on him what he sort of wants to do with it. And he's growing old now, so he wants to. And Steinitz was a great positional player, someone who thought deeply about the game. And he's also thinking deeply about the legacy of the game. And he's thinking that, I'm growing old, there has to be a way that somebody else can, play for the world title. So he really wants to play for the world title, doesn't mind losing it, but he wants to hand it over to someone. Now, at this point in time, the procedure that they kind of decide, because there's no organization, is whichever strong player wishes to challenge me, if they can come up with the funding for the game, I'll play. So it becomes about the funding. So there are two really strong players at this time called Siegbert Tarasch and Emanuel Lasker. Tarasch has slightly better results in the few and far in between tournaments that happen, but he can't raise the money for it. Lasker manages to raise the money, and Lasker wins it in the mid 1890s. He beats our man here. Now, Lasker holds the title for 27 years, right? He holds it till 1921. But what really happens during this period is that it is the same thing. He is a champion. You want to come and play with him. You got to, come with the money and put up the money, and only then do you get to play. So over the years, as they go by, Rubinstein tries, can't raise the money, really strong player. Nimzowitsch, who is the father of the hyper-modern school of chess, as it were. And I won't go into much detail there, but in chess, early principles were that you have to occupy the center, take central control. And Nimzowitsch was fine, you do that. I'll fianchetto and I'll come from the flanks and whatever. Let's not get into that. But he couldn't raise the money either. And eventually, a young Cuban player called Jose Raul Capablanca came up. In 1911, they began talks of a match. But again, the conditions were ridiculous. Lasker said that if the match is not won by somebody by 2 points, it will be considered a draw. And in case of a draw, Lasker retains the title. Now, a ridiculous rule, but also a precursor to future rules which are as ridiculous. Eventually, what happens is that 1920, Lasker says, I don't even want to do it. I was supposed to play Capablanca. He can be world champion. People protested and said, aise kaise? Other players protested. So he said, fine, I'll play Capablanca. He played Capablanca in 21. He lost. Capablanca as world champion. A beautiful player. People still look at his games for the elegance of the play. And some people even used to refer to him as the machine, ironic in a modern context. But just a beautiful, elegant player. The simplicity, he made it look easy. Now, Capablanca now decides कि यार world championship है. This is not fair that arbitrarily who can put up the money, it will be decided by that. We should have the world championship every year. So you would think, modern outlook, it's getting modernized. But it doesn't really work out like that, because it never really happens. At this time, an organization called FIDE is formed, but it's not really powerful. They try to do something, it doesn't really work out. And in 1929, a gentleman named Alexander Alekhine, who is Russian, wins the world title. Again, another brilliant player. And now the war is beginning to come and all that. And again, it's arbitrary. He defends his title, then he loses his title in 1935 to Max Euwe. Then he wins it back in a rematch, because the conditions of matches all the way for the next 40, 50 years are that there will be a world championship match. If it is tied, the champion retains the title. And if the champion loses, he gets an automatic right to a rematch a year later. So Alekhine gets a rematch in 1937. He wins it back. He dies in 1945. Now the question is, what do you do about the world championship? FIDE says, hum karenge. FIDE says, we'll organize the world championship, and with a slight break, they've basically organized the world championship since then. Like the BCCI is to cricket in India, it's FIDE to global chess, like FIFA is to football. And how do they do this now? Now, in 1938, there was a very strong tournament known as the Avro tournament. There were 8 players who played then who were considered the best players in the world, right? It was an invitational tournament. So FIDE decides that we will have another tournament with these 8 players. But the field shrinks, a couple of the players can't be there or don't want to be there. Russia says instead of X guy, we'll send Y guy. All of that is happening. Eventually, 5 people play a quadruple round robin tournament, if I remember correctly, in 1945, won by a gentleman named Mikhail Botvinnik. Right? And even though Alekhine was Russian, it's with Botvinnik that we consider the start of the Soviet school of chess.
Russian. Alekhine was white Russian. He was not living in Russia. He was living in France.
Sure, but the bottom line was that he wasn't a nationalist. Correct. And he didn't really care much for Russia. Correct. And so the deal was, when we talk of the Soviet school of chess, it starts with Mikhail Botvinnik. Yes. And it starts as something that is organized. Now, we discussed it briefly in another episode where I shared this quote with you. There was a gentleman named Nikolai Krylenko. Right? Nikolai Krylenko was a prominent Soviet functionary, though Stalin got him executed in 1938. But before he got executed, he said the following words. We must finish once and for all with the neutrality of chess. We must condemn once and for all the formula chess for the sake of chess, like the formula art for art's sake. We must organize shock brigades of chess players and begin immediate realization of a 5-year plan for chess. So the logic here is this, that there is, and this is before the Cold War. Krylenko was knocked off by Stalin in 38. But there is already this battle going on that we are the greatest nation on earth. Our system is the greatest nation on earth. What is a proxy for demonstrating the superiority? The Soviets decide that it is going to be chess. So what happens is that it is pushed all the way from school level. You go to kindergarten, like the way we are taught math, you are taught chess. And anyone who shows any promise, they keep getting promoted up the ranks till eventually the people who emerge at the very top, out of this really wide pool of people who are playing and who have been trained, they are like incredibly good. Now, at the same time, the way FIDE organizes the World Championship cycle is that they decide that, countries will have to nominate players, whoever wins the national championships. You'll have a zonal tournament, so Asia will have a tournament, Europe will have a tournament. You'll have an interzonal tournament where all the winners come. And any one country cannot send more than a certain number of players. So on one hand, it might seem equitable because Soviet Union is dominant. They've probably got 10 of the top 10 in the world, but they can't be 10 guys, they can be 4 guys or whatever the number is. But the other way to think about it is that Botvinnik was pally with the people who made the rules, and he, by restricting the number of people from his own country, he restricted the number of top level players who could threaten him. So now there's a Soviet dominance that goes on. Botvinnik, draws a World Championship match with David Bronstein, but he retains it because, hey, he loses a World Championship match in 57 to Vasily Smyslov, but wins it back the next year because automatic rematch. In 1960, he loses to a great, adventurous player called Mikhail Tal, known for his sacrifices and, his creative and imaginative play. But Tal has huge health issues and loses it back to Botvinnik in the rematch in 61. And finally, the rematch is done away with. So Tigran Petrosian, pioneer of the exchange sacrifice, Tigran Petrosian wins the title in 1963. And there is no rematch, and Botvinnik is growing old, and Botvinnik is now set up a school, he's training people. Karpov and Kasparov are both Botvinnik students, by the way, from that school. So just an enormous figure, like a behemoth in a sense. You could say the Soviet Anand in a sense, and I'll contextualize that soon. So Petrosian beats Boris Spassky in 67, but loses to Spassky in 69. And then Bobby Fischer, 1973. And Bobby Fischer is like a rebel in the system. When he first begins, interestingly, as a teenager in the interzonals, he doesn't do all that well. Like, these Soviet guys are really strong. Paul Keres, F.M. Geller, Tal himself for the while that he was there, they're really strong. But eventually he gets better, and he's a prodigal talent, and he's a mad player and one of the true geniuses of the sport. And in 73, what happens is he said, nah, I'm not going to play. He's like being a rebel and all that. So he doesn't qualify from the zonals because he doesn't play. And then he decides, I want to play. And one by one, the top 3 qualifiers, I forget their names now, one by one, the top 3 American qualifiers drop out. And they say, we don't want our chance set. This is Bobby's playing. I'll give my place up for Bobby. And all 3 of them have to drop off for him to take the place, and he does. Wow. Right? And then he plays, and he wins 6-0 against a guy called Taimanov. He wins 6-0 against a guy called Pal Benko, super strong player. He destroys Tigran Petrosian, former world champion. He plays Boris Spassky. He has, in Reykjavik, in a famous match, he sort of forfeits the first game, and then he goes on to win the world championship. And you're like, wow. And what happens at this time in Soviet chess is something really interesting. There are 2 incredibly strong players who are now fighting to battle with Fischer in the next world championship. One of them is a member of the old guard, in a sense, the earlier generation of Spassky and all that, Viktor Korchnoi, who is just a brilliant player, perhaps one of the best players never to be a world champion. And another is a young gun called Anatoly Karpov. And Anatoly Karpov is completely new. Fischer hasn't played him before, really, as far as I know, in serious games once Karpov came up. And Karpov beats Korchnoi and qualifies for the World Championship in 1975. And Fischer starts setting conditions, bizarre conditions, which I forget, but they're very similar to the conditions Lasker set for Capablanca, a 2-game gap and all of that shit. And essentially, he doesn't want to play. Now, we can speculate about why that is. But he's reached the highest level he could have, and he disappears from chess, becomes a recluse, and after, grows his big beard, and kind of leaves chess forever. And Karpov takes over. Karpov is a beautiful player, just a positional genius. And Karpov is world champion from 75 to 85. And then in the early 80s, the young, great talent of Garry Kasparov, a hero of both of us for more than just his chess, just a remarkable man, a remarkable player. He comes over. Now, the Soviet Union was the sort of system where they would pick their national heroes and they would decide कि ये बंदा बनेगा. And Karpov is perfect for them. He is a dedicated Soviet person.
He's loyal.
He's loyal to them. He is young, so 20, 30 years he can do. So, so they are, for example, biased against Korchunoi, who plays more World Championship matches against Karpov. But even though he's also Soviet, they don't want him to win. They're happy with Karpov. He is a party man. He is a loyalist. He's a clean face. That's the guy they want. And Garry Kasparov is this young, aggressive, muffat kind of guy. And they don't really want him either. And he and Karpov play a series of matches, and the rules in those days are that first person to win 6 games, I think, but it's unlimited. There's no limit. So I think Karpov wins a bunch, and then Kasparov wins a bunch and catches up, and then draw, and it's going on forever, and their health is collapsing, and it's a ridiculous, nonsensical thing. And eventually, I think the match is cancelled. They play again. Kasparov wins. Kasparov plays another match against Karpov later, wins that also. It's all going swimmingly well. Right, so that's kind of how we get to the 90s. And in the 90s, there is a split. Kasparov is supposed to play Nigel Short. There is some issue with the monies being put up with the match. Kasparov says, fuck you, FIDE. As it is, where do you have legitimacy from? You also randomly came up in 45. I'll take over now. He forms something called the PCA. And the PCA organizes the Kasparov short match, which he wins easily. And FIDE continues its own cycle. But the people who eventually become FIDE world champions, still as a reunification in the late 2000s, are not really considered legit because they're having a single one-off tournament and somebody wins, and they're not really considered at that level. The more serious level is Kasparov. He was a boss. He was in charge. So the cycle that PCA runs is the main thing. There is this amusing moment where and again, the bizarre thing about World Championship so far is a world champion just sits and waits. There's a series of tournaments where hundreds of people play, and then one guy comes out of that drudgery, the marathon, and huffing and puffing, and then they have to play the world champion, and if it's a draw, world champion keeps it. Extremely unfair system. So the system continues, and Alexei Shirov, a great player, I think circa 1997, plays Vladimir Kramnik, and the winner is supposed to play Kasparov, and Shirov wins. But they can't organize the monies for the match, so that cycle just falls apart. And then Kramnik is the guy who emerges at the next cycle, plays Kasparov in the early 2000s, and wins, and Kramnik is now the PCA world champion, and Kasparov eventually retires. And then there is a reunification later on, and at that reunification, Anand gets it back. Vishy Anand plays some spectacular World Championship matches. I've written a long profile for ESPN which sort of contextualizes that, and we'll link that from the show notes. Anand wins it, and then he loses it eventually to Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen beats a number of people after that. He beats Anand himself. Anand manages to win the candidates tournament, qualify once again, but he's kind of older by now, and Carlsen is genuinely...
That match was in Madras.
Correct. And Carlsen is genuinely a genius. Like the highest praise, like Kasparov, I think once said about him that he combines the best of Fischer and Karpov. So the dynamic, creative, energetic play of Fischer and Karpov, just the boa constrictor, squeezing. So Carlsen is known for, taking an equal position and then squeezing you for 40, 50 moves, and without making a mistake you lose, and you don't know how you lost, but Carlsen just does it. So a remarkable player like that. So Carlsen then defends his title against Sergei Karyakin, against Caruana, against Nepomniachtchi, and eventually he decides that I don't want to play the World Championship anymore. And when he decides that, there is then a World Championship match out of the first two people at the candidates tournament, which are Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren, and Ding Liren wins it. And Ding Liren is the current world champion, and the next candidate tournament was Gukesh, and Gukesh and Ding Liren are playing in a few months. So that is sort of my potted history of the world championship cycle.
Amit, so far you gave us a narrative about the history of world champions, world championship, the rise and fall of the Soviet school. Okay, now take us under the hood and tell us more about the game. What were the ideas in the game? How did the ideas evolve?
So I want to do exactly that. I think what happens when you learn a game of chess is you learn the moves, and then what you are doing is that you are immediately focused on the tactics. And initially you are thinking, if I do this, he will do that. If I do this, he will do that. And you're thinking in a tactical way. Later on, as you go deeper into the game, you learn to think in a strategic way where you plan for the long term. You say, ki, okay, I want to open this file so I can get my rook on it, right? I don't want to put my bishop behind a blocked pawn. You know, if it is a closed position, my knights can maneuver better. If it is an open position, I want to exchange my knight for his bishop, and then my bishop is more powerful, etc., etc. And a lot of this foundational strategic thinking behind the game actually is credited to Wilhelm Steinitz, who was one of the great positional players and the first world champion. But it's the Soviet school of chess which took it to a new level, right? Because what they are doing is they are building a pedagogy out of it. They're building an education system out of chess. Now, here's the thing. There's a study done by, I think, Adrian de Bruyne in 1942, which showed that the best chess players are not actually thinking more moves ahead than the amateur chess players. They are just much better at pattern recognition, right? Because they have played so much, they are not looking at individual pieces. They are looking at patterns within the board, that, oh, this is a castled kingside with a fianchetto, or, oh, you know, this is this kind of attack, and this is how, you know, we can maneuver this particular pattern, this is how we can take advantage of that formation, etc., etc. And that gets subtler and subtler and subtler. And what the Soviet school of chess did was it formalized a lot of this learning. So you get to pattern recognition by playing a lot, because then obviously you see a lot of patterns and you understand that. But the Soviets formalized it in this magnificent manner, and therefore, you know, right from school they were taught all these. They were taught from first principles, and you know, you got deeper and deeper, you got great nuance. While players in other countries would not get any of that, and they would almost have to figure it out by playing. You know, a dear friend of both of us, Devanshu Datta, knows Vishy Anand very well. He played chess seriously in the 1980s himself. So he was once telling me that, and I have a great episode of The Seen and the Unseen with him. We discussed chess there as well. And DD, as we call him, told me that, you know, he would, as a young player, he would go out and he would play the Soviet people, and he would sweat his way through the opening, and he would sweat his way through the middle game, and he'd take 40 minutes over a particular move, and then he would lose. And then the Soviet guy would say, ki, what were you calculating? It is taught to us in nursery that in this kind of formation you play like this, right? And people like Didi and people who come from other countries are having to figure out all that shit for themselves. There's no internet, by the way. There's no database. There's nothing in those early days. And I want to use this to put Anand's achievement in context, right? The metaphor that I have used is Vishy Anand winning the Chess World Championship is like someone taking a Maruti 800 into a Formula 1 race and winning, because he did not have all of this training. He had brilliant tactical sense, you know, and you look at Anand, he looks like such a
Nice
conventional
guy.
gentleman, such a nice guy. He was an aggressive, ferocious player, and is, in fact, I should not say boss, I apologize, Vishy, if you're watching this, just a remarkable player, beautiful to watch. And he didn't have the advantage of all of this. He had to learn it on the fly. He did. He beat all these guys. In his teens, he was one of the top players in the world. You know, just destroying all of them. India's first grandmaster. You know, I remember when I was a teenager, there was this kind of race that you had Praveen Thipse, who got a couple of norms but got stuck there. You had Dibyendu Barua, who famously had beaten Korchnoi when he was 12 years old, when Barua was 12 years old, not no, Korchnoi. And but Anand got there first, even though he was kind of younger, and now we have 84 of them. So, you know, I remember the days we had 0. It was a big deal to have any one of them. And so this is really Anand's achievement. Right now, this is the Soviet school of chess. Now I want to talk about computers, right? And
Before you start computers, I just want to say that in the spirit of what you were saying, there is a beautiful phrase in chess which always stuck in my head: as every Russian schoolboy knows.
yeah.
Okay, so for example, as every Russian schoolboy knows, the king is an attacking piece. Okay, so it would always be a sentence structure like that, and it's got a beautiful ring to it, that it would be a very deep and profound insight, but prefaced with as every Russian schoolboy knows.
Yeah, yeah, and really, it's the Soviet Union. It's a might of the Soviet Union, and you know, many of the world champions from different republics. So we've already spoken in this episode about one of your heroes, Garry Kasparov. I want to mention another one, Alan Turing. In 1948, Alan Turing and David Champernowne, they create this chess program, this chess computer called TuroChamp. And the thing is, it's on paper. It is an incredible algorithm, but there is no computer in the world in 1948 or even later which is powerful enough to actually process the algorithm. So it is just an algorithm on paper that they have created, but they can never really test it. And Turing, unfortunately, dies too young and too tragically, and Champernowne kind of abandons it, so that never really goes anywhere. But what is happening, and Moore's law really kicks in 1965. Moore's law is named, and it kicks in after that. And processing power eventually keeps going up to the point where you can process any algorithm or any combination of algos, and you know that that's fine. And a lot of this development of computer chess that is happening, like in the 1970s, there are exciting moments where people are getting really excited. But it is all brute force computing. It is about how many calculations you can do. You now have massive processing power. You're using minimax. You're using what is then state of the art, and you're calculating as much as you can. And this satisfies both programmers and chess players, because when programmers take up the challenge, and this is a great metaphor Gary Kasparov uses in the introduction to a book I'll recommend right at the end. And Kasparov's metaphor is this: that the reason computer programmers and chess players are disappointed is that the challenge they set themselves is a beautiful challenge of getting a robot to climb Mount Everest. But instead of a robot climbing Mount Everest, it is a tank which just steamrolls its way to the top. Right? So at an intellectual level, it feels kind of dissatisfying. Ye to brute force hai. But regardless for what that brute force is, it is still a long time till computers are getting anywhere close to humans. Another of your heroes, Ken Thompson, creates a program called Bell, which is in fact the world computer champion in the early 1980s, and I think reaches a level of about 2200 ELO, which is quite a lot and stronger than me today. And so there is progress, but it is kind of slow, and there are some people who predict that, oh, this shit is never going to happen and all of that. And people tend to overestimate the short term, underestimate the long term, but in the long term it happens. In 1997, Kasparov loses to Deep Blue, Kramnik again loses to Deep Fritz in 2006, and basically by the early 2000s, brute force has won. Computers are incredibly strong, and it is not just brute force. The important thing to remember, and this is the point that Demi Hassabis made, the creator of AlphaZero, that all of these enormously powerful chess computers, the early versions of Stockfish and Houdini and all that, which are much more powerful than any human by that time, are also have programmed into them thousands and thousands of human-made heuristics and human-made principles, and the evaluations are based on that, and so on and so forth. Now, an interesting thing happens that computers get much stronger than humans at this point, right? And you would imagine that there is going to be, and I'm going to use a phrase you love, a great flattening sound, that now everybody will have access to this kind of brute force computing. And what the brute force computing therefore means is that everything will get homogenized, they'll play the same way, and chess will go to hell, it won't be interesting anymore. The opposite happens. The opposite happens because a great flattening sound was the Soviet school of chess. That's where the homogenizing force happened, that these are the principles with which you played, and everybody kind of is a replica of everybody else in good ways. Those principles arise for a reason, but they all kind of play the same way. And what computers give you is they give you concrete exceptions to the general principles. So there is an opening where you do not play a particular move because, let us say, that it goes against a general principle of the game, so you don't even consider it a candidate move. But the computer tells you that no, unexpectedly this leads to a win, and therefore you should play this. And when players start using computers for pedagogy, 2000s onwards, they develop their own individual styles, their own distinctive ways of playing, and it goes in a different direction. Because of this. Also, what happens is our friend DD, Devanshu Datta, plays correspondence chess. Now, you might well ask that how can anybody still play correspondence chess in the computer age? Gentle readers, correspondence chess is something that evolved decades ago, and the idea was you would play chess by letter. In a letter, you would write a move. Like, I will write a move by letter and send it to you in whichever town you are or country you are. You will reply to that with a move and send it back to me. And correspondence chess can take years to play out, right? And they have correspondence chess world championships and so on. And Devanshu, last I spoke to him, still participates in those world championship cycles, is still a strong correspondence chess player. It is because the computers actually think in different ways. Stockfish and Houdini and so on will think in different ways. They process different kinds of positions differently. And so there's still a lot of nuance nuance there. It's even within the computer world, it's not a straight flattening sound. Now, what happens a few years ago is revolutionary, and this is Alpha Zero, where the Alpha Zero approach inspired by AlphaGo is that brute force nahi karenge bhai. You do millions of calculations, we'll do thousands, right, per second or whatever. The Alpha Zero approach is that there will be no human-led principles or heuristics fed in. Instead, Alpha Zero played chess against itself for 24 hours. And in that fascinating process of 24 hours, all of chess evolution through human history happened, where you see a point in time where it is enamored by the French defense, then it realizes, nah, it's a little bit inferior, much as humans did. There is a point in time where it discovers the Berlin defense, which Kramnik revived to beat Kasparov in the early 2000s. And that entire evolution happens as Alpha Zero plays with itself, and then it goes beyond. And it's a black box. We don't know what principles or heuristics it is discovering for itself, but we know that they work. How do we know that they work? Alpha Zero plays Stockfish, then the strongest brute force engine, in a match, and it destroys Stockfish. It absolutely destroys Stockfish. It plays in and how it destroys Stockfish is not through calculating better, because it is actually calculating 1/10 or 1/100th of what Stockfish is calculating, but simply by applying the principles and heuristics it has discovered on its own by playing itself. And this is again a eureka moment for chess, where you begin to realize that some of the weightages that we put are actually wrong, that we were overvaluing material in contrast to initiative, that actually taking a pawn up the flanks from the A or H file can be really interesting and can create possibilities. While earlier, when I was learning chess in the late 80s, early 90s, it would have been like, what on earth? Considered stupid and over-attacking, and you're creating weaknesses in the position. And so new ways of playing sort of came up. And that's where we are today. Like today, sort of a commercial version of Alpha Zero is something called Leela. And players today will train using all of these different machines. And yeah, that's where we are today.
Yeah. I remember I was so startled when one day our friend Ayush said to me that mobile phones have reached the point where every mobile phone in the world can beat the world champion. And that was really amazing to me, meaning, I've been with this process all along. Also, I feel a little sad that, and what are mobile phones used for? It's like, what do people do with this miracle of computation that has been given to them? It's like nothing. So it's just such an irony that every mobile phone is more powerful than the world champion. And that's a statement on where computers have come, on how Moore's law has played out. So in this, is it a sad world that, have we killed off chess? As our friend Harshvardhan was saying, chess is over. That really it's now fun for Alpha Zero to play Stockfish. It's a great land for engineers to build better systems, but has it become dull for humans? Do humans just study with the programs? Are we in a new Soviet school?
So it is, again, this is an intuitive way of thinking. But let me tell you something. Supposing someday there are, AI bots which can imitate both of us exactly. And you say, do an Ajay Shah conversation. Ajay Shah talking to Amit Varma about this. Give me a conversation. It'll be amazing. It'll do everything we are doing. Will you stop talking to me, Ajay Shah? You won't, right? The human connection matters. And in chess, here is the thing. It is not as if you have solved the game. There's something called table bases. Table bases are used in endgame positions, and I think in the mid-2000s, it was solved till 6 pieces. If there are 6 pieces or less, you have a perfect solution. Now it's been solved till 7 bases, and I believe 7 pieces on the board, and I believe that now they're working on 8 pieces. So it's very far from being solved. It's very complex. All the machines sort of tackle it differently. And it is not that you just study an opening. There is an optimal line. If you study the optimal line, to bhai kya karega? Every game will be a draw. It's not like that at all. In fact, many of the great players like Carlsen, for example, doesn't like doing too much prep. You do a certain amount, but he really wants to play over the board. And so what he will do is he will try to take the game to what he considers a playable position, even if it is slightly inferior. And by playable, what it means is both players have to think for themselves. And then the real game starts. So typically, here is where preparation comes in. Everybody obviously knows the key mainstream lines that are played in any opening. But when a player is preparing, a top GM is preparing for a tournament with other top GMs. It is not that there is no innovation. The discovery happens where, supposing there is an optimal line, I pick a suboptimal move, but that suboptimal move is suboptimal against perfect computer play, and you are a human being. And therefore, I am betting that I will play an inferior move, but you will not be able to find the perfect refutation of it, and therefore we will play. And because you are not prepared for that and it takes you by surprise, you have to start thinking for yourself, and you may start second guessing yourself. And so a lot of the prep that goes on is about how can I deviate and do something unexpected, which is not necessarily better, but which simply takes the other person out of their likely prep. Because what happens if I'm studying an opening, I look at the top moves. I'm not going to look at your inferior moves, because I'm going to assume ki you will prepare, you're not going to play those moves. So that is how you take me out of the book. You play one of those moves, and it is only inferior against another computer. It is not inferior against a human, because some of the responses to it can be so counterintuitive.
I mean, it could take months for a human to fully understand a line.
You simply cannot. So you'll find a common, thing in tournaments that you'll have players playing each other, and somebody like there's a game that Nakamura played in the recent candidates where he mixed up the move order. Right, apparently. This is what the commentators were saying, that, oh, he probably mixed up the move order and he got confused. And you mix up the move order slightly, everything changes and you can go completely wrong. There's a great interview of Gukesh by Sagar Shah of Chess Base. We'll link it from the show notes, and I'll talk more about Sagar and Chess Base later. And in that, Gukesh talks about how in a particular opening he played a move that is unusual. It's not a mainstream line. It's not a bad move or a good move. It is simply different. If I remember correctly, he was black and at some point he did h6. And h6 can come later in the game, but he played it first. But by changing the move order, now the opponent has to start thinking, ki, bhai, why did he do this? What's going on? Has he got some secret prep? And then they are playing themselves, and that kind of becomes a game. So there is a lot of action happening in the game on the player side, because this is the kind of prep you do. However, when it comes to something like the World Championship match with millions of dollars on the line, right, both in direct prize money and whatever benefits accrue after that, what happens is that the two players will practice, will train for that for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. They study intensively. It can be incredibly dreary, where it's study, and often like the match between Carlsen and Caruana ended even. It was all draws, and eventually then gentleman with a goat. And eventually, that went to rapid tie breaks, and Carlsen was better at the
Do they
shorter
build teams?
formats.
How big are their teams? How many seconds?
Many seconds, and they keep the seconds separate. Because if I get a second who is good at a particular line of the Sicilian, you as my opponent will know ki bhai, the seconds are like this. You profile the seconds and you can figure shit out. So they'll have one main second. Like Anand would have, Anand used to have a gentleman named Peter Heine Nelson, and Peter then moved on to being Carlsen's second for a long time. And he was actually the captain of a team of seconds. So there would be 4 other guys, and most people wouldn't know their names or who they are. And all their analysis would come to Peter, and he would then distill all of that and discuss it with Carlsen, that, okay, these are the possible lines that this person can play, and this is how you, go for it. And the problem, and the thing in a tournament is, it doesn't matter. You're playing a different game every day. You're not supposed to prepare everything. You can reach playable positions. In a World Championship match is really tough. So finally what happened was Carlsen got sick of the whole process. He said, this is no way of doing it. That you have the same old format where the World Championship just waits, and then there are candidate tournaments and different ways to qualify for that, and one guy ends up on top and he plays the World Champion. And 6 months before the World Championship, both players are basically, they don't have a life. They're just sitting and studying. And he said, man, I don't want to do this. Figure out another way of doing a World Championship. I don't even know why it should be classical chess. Why not the time formats? Why not, incorporate rapid and blitz and all that? And these days, Carlsen and various other top players are playing more and more chess 960, also known as Fischer random, and which is basically where you, the pawns are where they are, but you randomize all the other pieces, and both randomize equally for both sides. So there are, 960 unique positions. That's why chess 960.
So all opening theory is out of the window.
All opening theory is out of the window. The principles apply, the heuristics apply, but the theory is out of the window.
Yeah.
And, so I think Wesley So won the World Championship of that, then Nakamura did, if I remember, and Carlsen loves playing that. He loves playing the shorter formats. He's moved away from classical. But that is as far as regards the World Championship. For anyone who saw these candidates, which I really loved, the case of the matter is that the games were exciting. It was fantastic. It was beautiful.
what is the problem of cheating in chess? That, in principle, if I have an infinitely powerful computer that is able to advise me somehow during a match, is this a meaningful, realistic threat, or at the top levels, it is worse than useless?
It's an enormous threat, but I believe it's also an overblown threat which will be tackled. Now, here's the thing on chess.com, for example, they have it's an arms race and they have very complicated algorithms which will go through your games as they are happening and figure out if you're cheating just by the quality of your moves. Now, what a sophisticated cheat will do is he won't follow the computer on every move because obviously then you get caught. But in the key moments, he might play a key move which he might not otherwise have played and take an advantage that way and then continue to play himself. But algos have gotten smarter and smarter, and chess.com routinely just keeps banning many players because they discover through their algos that they are cheating and so on. Now, in the real world, it is.
But may I ask, what's the point? I mean, why would I play on chess.com and cheat? Why is this even remotely interesting?
It's not for you, it's not for me, but there are people who will do it. I mean, we know what the world is like. You want to boast, you have a great rating, you want to win a tournament, and really good players.
Tournament. So, chess.com, there's no tournament
There are-
of
there
this-
are- there are
I mean, not
tournaments.
important ones. The really important things is you show up with the physical.
No, but even the prestige and all counts for a lot. But anyway, this is an issue. You're right that outliers cheat and outliers get caught, and it's an arms race, and that's not really so much of a worry. The worry is what happens in a physical tournament, right? And there are players, including grandmaster level players, who have been caught with a mobile phone in the toilet. So they will take a toilet break, they will go and their position will be on the phone and analysis will be on and they'll see the move there and they'll come back. And people like this have gotten caught. There are regular whispers that go on in the chess world about top grandmasters who cheat or cheated in the past. There was a famous incident where there's a controversial American player called Hans Niemann, and Hans Niemann used to cheat online, which he's admitted to. And he used to cheat online, he's very brash, and then he played in a tournament and he beat Carlsen. And Carlsen I think withdrew from the tournament and alleging that this guy is clearly cheating, right? And that became a big thing. And other players like Nakamura also said, yeah, he's obviously cheating. And if you see the games, top players can make out that these are not moves a human makes because they're just so unintuitive or whatever. And that was the allegation. Allegation was never proved. Typically in a top tournament, what happens is you not only leave your mobile phone outside, but you're completely checked with metal detector. The games are not broadcast live. The games are broadcast with a 20-minute delay. So if
There's no collaborator who can help.
yeah, if there's an accomplice on the outside, first of all, he's seeing the game late, and second, he has no way of reaching you because you're like in a closed chamber. So especially for tournaments with a lot at stake, that kind of thing is really common. So cheating is not really something I worry about. I think it's a little bit of a cycle, but eventually, I think as far as online is concerned, the sites like chess.com will win that arms race eventually, and it'll become pointless, and great players won't mess their reputations up. And yeah, so that's kind of where cheating is.
So tell us about the great rise of Indians in chess. How did we go from 1 to 84 grandmasters?
1 to 84 is a long journey that's taken a lot of time, but the last few years have been very exciting, not just for Indian chess, for young people coming up in chess for different reasons. First of all, I'll tackle the angle of chess becoming a spectator sport. Yes, chess has become a spectator sport, and part of the reason for that is the way that is now shown that when you have chess commentary going on, you will have commentators who will be extremely knowledgeable and often will be using an engine, and the engine will be showing all the moves, the best moves, the optimal moves, the evaluation of the game. So for a newbie or even a person like at our level who doesn't really understand the nuances of what the grandmasters are thinking, we have guides in terms of other top grandmasters. Peter Svidler particularly is just a favorite commentator of mine, loves cricket as well. I'd love to do a podcast with him someday. And these grandmasters will be contextualizing sometimes without the help of the engine. Like Anand will never look at the engine because all these top guys, they'll be giving you insights into how grandmasters think. But they'll also often be using engines and giving you great insight as well. So that's made the game much more accessible.
On chess as a spectator sport, I read that there are tournaments where on the computer screen the audience sees the heart rate of both
Yeah.
the players.
You s-
So you don't see my heart rate, I don't see your heart rate. We're playing classical.
Yeah.
But the audience is seeing our heart rate. I think that's genius.
That's genius, and also there is a confession booth where in the middle of a game a player can go into the booth and tell everybody that this is what I'm thinking right now. Let me see if he does this. So these are beautiful innovations which have made the game accessible, and I absolutely love them. Now, poker in a similar way became popular when they started showing whole cards, so the audience could see what cards each player has. And another commonality which I see with poker is that in poker, youth became a big deal, and young players started dominating barely out of their teens because they would play, millions of hands online. So a Doyle Brunson, an old school poker player, would take 30 years to play a certain number of hands, and you could do it in 30 months online because you're multi-tabling, playing many tables together. And in chess, what aided the pedagogy in chess was that you had a similar phenomenon where all the top players are essentially playing online all the time. You go online, you can see a game with Hikaru Nakamura playing, you can see a game with Pragnananda playing, Nihal Sareen is a great blitz players. So all of these, the young players today really polish their skills playing a lot of online chess.
So they're getting volume.
They're putting in volume exactly as poker players do, and that sample size helps the pattern recognition just get sharper and sharper and sharper. Plus, they are using computers with one interesting exception until recently, and I will tell you about that. Now, we've had 1 to 84 is not just about computers. 1 to 84, honestly, credit must also be given to Vishy Anand for inspiring a generation of players. A lot of it has happened in Tamil Nadu. In an earlier episode, spoken about Mylapore as a hub. We've spoken about how these hubs matter. So that definitely matters. But also, all of this playing online has made a huge difference. Now, as far as the current time is concerned, there are 4 young Indian talents who are incredible players. There's Gukesh Domaraju, there's Pragnananda, there's Nihal Sareen, and there's Arjun Erigaisi. In fact, Caruana thinks that out of these 4, Erigaisi is the most promising. And all of these players have actually beaten Magnus Carlsen in different formats at different times because everybody's playing so much these days, right? In the candidates, Erigaisi couldn't qualify, but there were 3 Indians there. Gukesh was there, Prag was there, and Vidit Gujarati, a Nagpur player who's from a slightly older generation, late 20s, he was there. Gukesh is 17, I think Prag is 18. And there was controversy before the tournament because Magnus Carlsen, did a video where he ranked all the candidates, and Gukesh was pretty low down. And I actually feel that Magnus got that right, but the nuance he didn't mention was that some of the players are high variance. They have high ceilings and high floors, and Gukesh, in my mind, was one of them. And I was partly wrong, but the reason I thought he was one of them was that in Gukesh's ratings, I had seen swings before that. In the Olympiad, he did incredible big rating swing. Then in the Grand Swiss, which was one of the qualifying tournaments for the candidates, he did terrible. He lost 20, 30 rating points. So I thought that there's a lot of variance there, so you can't tell. So he could win and he could finish near the bottom. Another player I thought was high variance was Firouzja, and it so happened Ali Raza Firouzja, great Iranian player now based in France, he finished near the bottom. But I think his ceiling was high enough that he could have won. Now, where I realized I was wrong is that Gukesh is very young. During the tournament, within the tournament, he showed incredible stability. There was no variance. He was a one player who was never outplayed. He lost a game to Firouzja because he blundered in time trouble, but he was never outplayed, showed incredible stability. And now let me tell you something interesting about Gukesh that I learned, which is that until he became a grandmaster, he did not use computers.
Wow, he only played humans.
He only studied through humans, he only studied through books, he would study himself physically. And the result of that is that people who train with computers are always looking for interesting lines, looking for, concrete exploits here and there. And this guy is super solid on the principles. Super solid on the principles. So when he plays, he's saying that I don't need to out-prepare you. I just need to take you out of your prep somehow. And then we'll play and I'll outplay you, boss. That is...
And is he in the Mylapore community, so he gets intensive humans to play with all the time?
He is in that community. Prag is in that community. Vidit is based in Nagpur. Erigaisi, I think, Arjun is based in Hyderabad. So they're from different places. I'm not sure where Nihal Sareen is based. So that's kind of where it is. So it is incredibly exciting. Now, when Magnus Carlsen gave up the World Championship, I think it devalued the World Championship enormously because Carlsen is a dominant player of his generation. He's like 20, 30, 40 rating points ahead of the next guy. So the number 2, 3, all of that fluctuates between between the 2790s and 90s and the 2800s. He's been in the mid 2800s, even was saying at one point he'll reach 2900. So he is by far the best player in the world, clearly acknowledged. And I feel it devalues the world championship a little bit, but nevertheless, it is not the fault of any of the other guys that boss, he's not there. And Gukesh has kind of gotten there. He's playing Ding. Ding at his best is an incredible player. Before COVID, he was probably the second best in the world. During COVID, he kind of fell apart. I don't know whether there were mental issues, but he didn't play for a long time. And Carlson has said that he's a broken man and he's not going to do well, so on and so forth. He's been a shadow of his former self, but he did come second in the last candidates. He did beat Jan Nepomniachtchi in the World Championship match. At his best, he's a really, really good player. But Gukesh is stable. He has nerves of steel. You know, Gukesh, his main second and coach is a gentleman named Gregor Gajowski, who used to be Anand second. And he said that what I find remarkable about Gukesh is that he is just so calm. He is just so chill and not worried. So I have high hopes for Gukesh, but at the same time, the World Championship is devalued. At the same time, I think classical chess is losing some of its currency. The time limits are gaining. 960 will probably also become a big thing. But I think these are exciting times for Indian sport. One hopes Gukesh wins, and.
And also, if you peer into the next 10-15 years, okay, Magnus will decline. And then we've got an explosion behind of a whole wave of amazing young people who have grown up around the new age of, post Alpha Zero. There will be the next wave of teens from India. It's going to be so much fun.
It's going to be mind-blowing, and you'll never have another Magnus. He's the last dominant player. Yeah. Kasparov was dominant, Magnus was dominant, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Now they'll all jostle each other with very small differences in the elo.
Which is wonderful, because they're all really awesome. I'll love whatever I see of these kids, their personas. They're just so stable. They're well balanced. They're wonderful people. You get that sense. So yeah, exciting times ahead. Gentle readers, as you can see, we are no longer in the mountains. The light kind of went there, and we have shifted to another location.
And I was frozen.
He was frozen. He was wearing only 2 layers, got optimistic. And we shall shift location in another way. We've been speaking a lot about chess. We both love the game and so on and so forth. And you are, by profession, an economist who loves chess with a poet's soul, as we have discussed before. And the show is called Everything is Everything. So tell me a little bit about how you can relate chess to the world at large, and how you can bring frames from the world at large to think about chess.
The Soviets went after chess because Lenin and Trotsky and a whole bunch of those very smart people used to play chess themselves, and they thought this is a place where it's pure human intelligence, and so winning and dominating in chess will be proof of the superiority of the Soviet system. So chess is unique. It's a little different from many other things. Okay, so football prowess or cricket prowess are interesting and different, and I am going to come back to cricket in some respects here. But there is something interesting around chess. So let me try to put up a bunch of questions that should just trigger us into thinking, and we won't necessarily get answers, but I want to do more of a rumination. So, if a country does well in chess, does that say something about the economic growth and development and the greatness of that society? If a country is able to create is able to become a home to 100 grandmasters, then does that by symmetry say that that country is then well on its way to 100 of any of the other heights of human capability, whether it is particle physics or literature or poetry or business or politicians or civil servants or maybe even economists? Okay, so is there an analogy that, hey, you could be so great in chess, then why couldn't you be equally great in so many other walks of life? Okay, so that's a second question that we should think about. Then a third group of questions is about the role of nature, nurture, family, community and culture in coming together to make each of us. There is a lot of optimism and hope, because in some ways a vast energy has been unleashed in India, where people from no great background have powered their way into the Indian society in certain aspects. And so Does that mean that it can keep working, it can keep going? And how does the emergence of 84 grandmasters give us insights into the way in which nature, nurture, culture, community and family matter in making each of us, and how does that shape our thinking about the world? Okay, so these are the kinds of questions where it is a natural jumping off point from chess. So you see India, 84 grandmasters, wow, right? I mean, so you and I are old enough to just feel that wow, we've gone from one Pravin Thipse making some norms to 84. So something big has happened. How does this change our view about India? And so therefore we have to grapple with all these analytical questions, that if you're going to take this fact and change your beliefs about India, we need to grapple with the theory of all these constructs. So let's start at the first, that if a country has a lot of chess masters, does that say something about the country? Is it a great country? Well, first I will score a trivial debating point. Look at the USSR. Okay, so they built the Soviet school of chess. They absolutely dominated from Botvinnik to Kasparov. And what good did it do them? Okay, it was a horrible regime, it was a broken regime, it collapsed, and imperial Soviet Russia contains the seeds of the damage and the destruction done in Putin's Russia. And if there is one thing that Russia is good at, it is at exporting all its talent. So it's a failed country. So you have one clear counter example where extreme success in chess went along with extreme and comprehensive societal and state failure. So no, don't get your hopes up. That doesn't prove anything. Now, when I compare the Soviet journey with the Indian journey, there is some room for hope. The Soviet journey was a state-led project where the state devoted resources and basically filtered through millions of young kids and created enormous incentives in society for people to play more chess. So it was like a manufactured revolution in chess playing capability, as they also did in many other aspects of athletic endeavor. The Soviets, like the Chinese, did well in a lot of Olympic medal tallies and so on. Whereas in India, I will take pride and say, no, this was not done by the Indian state. The Indian state did nothing. Okay, this was entirely done by the people. So then, yeah, I start respecting it more. That it's a greater achievement, that it organically bubbled up from the society, and it was not force fed on and some artificial thing where some hormones were injected and some creature was produced, which is really not organically emerging from the subsoil of the country. So that is the first debating point around a country with a lot of grandmasters. Okay, so let's go now into step 2. So just play with me with a theory right now that there is nothing in chess playing other than nature. It's not true, but let's just play the theory. So imagine that you're in a model where there is nothing in each person's elo other than the luck of the draw at conception. So at conception, there's a number written on your forehead, which is your frontier elo, the maximum attainable elo. Now in that case, the sheer population size of a country should generate a certain number of people at the upper tail. Okay, see, the beauty in chess is grandmaster is an objective number, it's not relative. So actually you can compare, you can create a panel data set of countries and the number of people above that objective threshold. And so if you will allow me to be geeky, I want a panel econometric model to predict the number of grandmasters coming out of a country. Okay, so there is a certain number of people in the country, it is a number of draws from a certain stable probability distribution. Okay, so we know that all humans are the same as far as a genetic endowment is concerned. There is no difference at all between every 2 people in Homo sapiens as far as the genetic lottery is concerned. So then it should be the case that a higher population is a larger number of draws, falling in the upper tail. So the upper tail is some stable 0.0001% of the population. Okay, so if you had to write a first model in panel econometrics to predict the number of grandmasters in a country, you would say I just take the population and I take some upper tail. And if my theory was purely by nature, that is all that matters is nature, then all you want is population and you should get complete predictions. Okay, this does not fit the data so well. So let us talk some numbers. India used to be at 0 with a very high population. Okay, Bangladesh does not fare well with a very high population. Pakistan does not fare well with a very high population. Okay, and right now India is at about 85, 84. The United States is at 101 and Russia is at 236. Now this doesn't quite go by population. So India is at 84 with 1400 million people, 1440 million people. America is at 101 grandmasters with something like 333 million people, and today's Russia is at about 140 million people and about 236 grandmasters. So already you're starting to see some other things going on, and Bangladesh and Pakistan, very large countries, not a lot of success in chess. So clearly the theory must be wrong. Okay, we must pound the table and say we have proved this theory is wrong. So it's more than just nature. There's more going on. So now let's think more about what's going on. There is nurture. Okay, you're not born from when the egg hatches, you don't know what it is to be a grandmaster. So clearly an all nature theory is not correct. It's not just talent. A lot else goes in. So Ayush and I were discussing this last night, and he has a thumb rule. He thinks that you need a family with like $5,000 per capita of income. So in a family of 5, about $25,000, so about 10-20 lakh rupees of family income, to create the conditions where there will be enough space for this silliness. And this is a pure waste of time and life to play chess. There will be that leisure class which plays chess at home, and maybe you will have an uncle or a family member that knows how to play some chess, and you will sort of get started at an early stage. And then at the key moments, you need to get a computer, you need to have an internet connection, ideally you need to get some coaching, and all this has to really start sub 10, because in today's world we know that if you don't start sub 10, it's too late. Okay, in the olden days you could blossom later. Now the game is very competitive. So you need a household conditions of nurture. So now in addition to nature, we are adding nurture, that you need the culture and the economic possibilities whereby there is chess in the air, and like there's a chess board and some people are playing just for fun. So there are many families in India where there is no chess board. Okay, there are very many families in India where this kind of knowledge is revered. So there is something cultural about revering chess and gravitating to chess as an activity when you are young. And then one does need the economic possibilities in the household, whereby at a sub 10 age, this will be taken seriously, where the parents will think, wow, it's so cool that my little 7-year-old snotty little brat actually beats me in chess. And then they graduate to a computer and an engine and chess.com and maybe a little bit of coaching and start playing in tournaments. And I only recently understood, you told me, that at the early age for the child to play in tournaments, the parents have to travel. So that again demands considerable prioritization and resources and flexibility and control of time on the part of parents. This again is a filter, that not many households would have a parent that is able to take significant breaks from work, sometimes even entirely give up the world of work, and to be able to self-fund travel expenditures, to be able to go around to tournaments. And I have not understood, you need to explain why many grandmaster level tournaments where you can win norms don't seem to happen in India, that you literally needed or need foreign travel to be able to make GM. And this is something I have not been able to understand, or maybe that will now start changing. Now that we are at 84, there will be enough tournaments where there is a sufficient critical mass of GMs. But at least intra-India travel is going to be required, meaning you will get a lot of action in Mylapore, but intra-India travel will be required, and this takes money, it takes prioritization. If a parent is going to say, I am not interested in chess, or no, shut up, you just need to prepare for your JEE, then these kinds of things won't happen. Or if a family is culturally not oriented towards these kinds of things, that there's really nobody in the extended family that sparks the child and gets the child going, then you won't make that lottery. So in a way we are filtering down from 1400 million to a much smaller number, and one can't precisely estimate that much smaller number, but there is a much smaller number of households where if that lucky draw of the DNA happens, then it gets expressed, then it blossoms. And then we'd have to think about Bangladesh and Pakistan and Russia and America, and now the model is making some more progress. So we've already gone away from a pure nature model to a nature and nurture model, and we are saying, nah, we need many of these inputs to be able to allow those random draws, the luck of the draw, to play itself out, and then you're going somewhere. And then there may be some element of community in this as well. You have emphasized that you'll go very far with a supportive family and engine at home, a decent PC at home that will play the engine, but above all chess.com, okay, where you play at ELO sorted levels, where you're wake up in the morning, you'll get an opponent at a plausible level and you will trash talk the person in the chat, and this is very important. I don't know this, but I'm curious and I wonder if it's true, and gentle reader, tell us if you think it's true. Is there a cultural hub in Mylapore in Madras where there is a whole sub-community of people who play with each other, of clubs, of coffee shops, where people hang out, where there are boards, where there are matches, where there are tournaments, where there are coaches, where there is a conversation? So, like you started saying that it's much more than mere computation, particularly in a post-AlphaZero world. There's a conceptual conversation and an argument going on, okay, about, for example, AlphaZero reshaped our views on compensation, that when I make a sacrifice, how quickly do I need to get it back? In the olden days, like the glorious games of the 19th century, there would be a rook sacrifice and it would be a meticulously planned combination that I would get it back within 5 moves, or I'm getting to a checkmate. Whereas in AlphaZero, we see him saying, no, I'm doing this for position. And he's relaxed. 10 moves go by, 15 moves go by, the compensation comes back because of a structural flaw on the other side, and I'm able to mount a pawn storm. And the compensation is not a combination, it's deep. We are doing a sacrifice in return for positional advantages. Now that's a conversation. It's not just by playing. It's not only playing on chess.com with ELO sorted peers. It's an intellectualization about the subject. It is language skills, it is being in the books, and it is being around articulate masters, not just an inarticulate person who plays very well and instinctively knows it, but an articulate master that is able to do this debate and this conversation that, oh, there was a great game last night and now let's analyze it. And you're not just analyzing it as a clueless person like me would. I would kind of appreciate the combinations. I would appreciate that seeming sense where apparently nothing went wrong, but everything went wrong. But in the hands of a master, there is a far more complex conversation going on. Could it be that there is a community in that Mylapore is a hotbed? Mylapore is the place where there is an congregation going on, where there are agglomeration economies like in urban economics, where many people have got together and they fuel each other, they compete with each other, they talk to each other, they make friends with each other. It's a human connection. For the most important things in the human race, we need to see each other face to face. Okay? We are mammals and we are subject to the foibles of mammals, which includes being able to read subtle muscle tone of each other's faces, which never happens on a video call. Okay? So that could be one kind of argument, that there was the development of a social network in Soviet Russia, where people lived in proximity to each other and talked with each other and carried a sustained research conversation around ideas. And now this is a conversation conducted in concepts, in language, not just in computation. Whereas an engine solves your computation question, it doesn't solve the intellectualization question. At the upper reaches of being a master, you need more than just calculation. You need books, you need conversations, you need debate, you need the current ideas on strategy. So could it be that that is starting to happen in a place like Madras? And a proof of that would be if parents and young people from all over India would have an interest in relocating to Mylapore. By the time they realize that this child is something exceptional, they would think that, we should just go live there. Or when a person gets to master level, when a person gets to GM level, the next sprint from GM to top 50 is a different level of challenge. And then maybe, is it better for a person to live in Mylapore, to be able to assemble teams, to have seconds, to be part of that research conversation where every day people are discussing new games and new ideas. Okay, so I wonder, I don't know that. Could it be the case? You will understand this better than me. So then now you're bringing the word community into the picture. So it's nature, nurture, community, where there are conversations happening, there's a research conversation running, and we are trying to be at the global state of the art on ideas. Of course, when you play, you are all alone. You should be in a Faraday cage where no signals can go into you. You're all alone, but then it's a lifetime of knowledge and learning and that intellectual perspective that you bring to the table, and then it comes together as being a master. So I would wonder whether there are thumb rules that you would be able to intuit, that if you have an amazing talent, how far can the talent go sitting in an isolated wasteland in a bedroom with a PC? So how far would that go? Okay, and then if the family is able to support on issues like travel, tournaments, how far would you go? And then if you are in the human hub where you are able to get that quiet, casual coffee and people are just shooting the breeze, but there are ideas going around, then it's a research network, it's urban agglomeration, and does that change things? So I feel these are interesting questions to think about in the context of chess. Do you want to talk about this right now? Because then I will go on
Yeah,
to
I'll
other
respond to
things.
this right now.
Yeah.
Like, one of my favorite quotes by Steven Pinker is nature gives you knobs, nurture turns them, right? And so, in that sense, nature and nurture combine in almost every
Everything.
field and
Yes.
everything that we do. The, here are the different ways in which nurture comes in here. Let's assume that your distribution of potential skill at chess, the maximum elo attainable, is on everybody's head, and some people have large knobs, some people have smaller knobs, as the case might be, and then nurture kicks in. Now, at one level, one example of nurture is, of course, the Soviet system. But when you look at India, that 1.4 billion number, I think, is a very false number. As we have discussed in the past in episodes, actually, 80% of the country lives in conditions of sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe there are, I would say, 10 to 20 million people who are living the kind of life where kids are encouraged in their leisure time to do things which are not immediately goal directed or instrumental. Too much of Indian middle class thinking even is trapped in this mindset of we got to crack the IIT, study for JEE, and we got to do this, we got to do that, etc. It's goal directed. Leisure time is critical for us to develop our other skills, and leisure time is critical if you want to immerse yourself in any extracurricular field and actually master it. Now, in the Soviet Union, this was not exactly an extracurricular field. It was kind of part of the curricular system. The incentives were great. So there I agree with Ayush. Whatever the figure might be is definitely true that you need to be kind of upper middle class, I would say, where you have the leisure time, you have the computer, your parents encourage you. The other aspect of that is cultural accidents. Like, we had the cultural accident of Vishy Anand spending formative years in Philippines. If Vishy Anand had grown up in India, he wouldn't be Vishy Anand, because in his formative years, he was in Philippines where there was a daily chess program or a weekly chess program. He used to watch that. He used to crack their puzzle of the week. They would send him books. At one point, they said, look, we've sent you all the books and don't enter this anymore. And that was a key part which I would say probably kept him above his contemporaries from India. But then what happens is that Vishy Anand, and we've discussed him earlier in this episode, just a great genius and a great man, a good man, becomes this massive figure of cultural importance. And it is no accident that Tamil Nadu is the hub of Indian chess. Even when I was playing as a teenager, Tamil Nadu was dominant and Maharashtra was decent. And that's kind of how it was. And you had one Barua in Bengal and you had random people elsewhere. But these were the main centers. Because, obviously, being a Tamil person himself, being based in Madras or Chennai as it is now, he had that massive influence. It became aspirational. And then parents began to say, hey, our kid could be the next Sachin. So we've done an episode earlier where we even spoke about chess a little bit on the importance of clusters. Silicon Valley is all where all the so much innovation happens, and you have different clusters known for different things. So similarly, it's true that Chennai and perhaps Mylapore, I'm not particularly familiar with the precise neighborhoods, became such a hub, and I think being part of such a hub is incredibly useful. However, I would say it's neither necessary nor sufficient, right? You have, and beyond that, you have people who are individuals who are not part of these hubs. Vidit Gujarati is in Nagpur, Arjun Narigasi, I think, is in Hyderabad, and even across the world, you have people who are kind of growing up in environments where they're not surrounded by chess clubs around them. I don't know what Firuza's environment was in Iran while he was there, but there isn't a renaissance of chess happening there. There are a few good players like Maksudlu and so on, but it isn't a renaissance. It is lone people. So I don't think it is necessary. I think a far bigger factor is the network effect, not of people in your geographic proximity, but of being able to play online, right? And conversations happen through games. Like one of my favorite chess players, Levon Aronian, a man of deep culture, once spoke about a game that he had just finished playing, very lost, but he had a smile on his face after that. And if I remember correctly, he was asked about the game, and he said, "I really enjoyed the conversation." And I love that every game of chess is like a conversation. You're discussing competing ideas. And at some level, obviously, you're always competitive and you want to win. But at some level, it is an enriching experience just for that. I play to play, right? That's sort of the game. And that's what is important. And by the way, long-term positional sacrifices have been around for a long time with humans. AlphaZero just gave a new dimension to it, where it showed us that the relationship between material and initiative might be even more skewed to the a side of initiative and opening up the position and so on and so forth. But Petrosian, for example, pioneered the exchange sacrifice, which is where you give away your rook for a minor piece, because you are guessing that increased activity in the middle game will compensate for the effective loss in material. A rook is considered more powerful than a knight or a bishop. So these conversations happen through games. They don't need to happen in person. At the same time, a critical part of the development of all these young Indian players is you have camps. Back in the day, I remember you used to have camps where a Soviet coach would come and he would, in 2-3 hours, he would distill nuggets of wisdom which you would never get otherwise, and you have to have those frames to get better. Vishy Anand has sort of formed a chess training center like that. He's worked with all these small kids who are all these young men rather who are doing so well now. So that is certainly a big factor. So I'd say that it's important, but it is not essential, and it is possible to overstate it. So if, for example, you're watching this and you're a parent in a small town somewhere and you can't relocate to Mylapore or whatever, do you have to? No, you don't have to. Just support your kid, let her, enjoy her natural curiosity. Chess.com has many, many training videos as well, and a couple of other chess sites. Many, many training videos. You're constantly playing all the time. You get a game within seconds with a person of a similar elo. It's just incredible. Let them immerse themselves in that world. In my time, getting hold of chess books was impossible. Knowledge was impossible. Today, it's all out there. Eventually, what will happen is once your kid reaches a certain level, she'll start going out. She'll start playing tournaments, and then you meet other players. And as you rise up the ranks, you form little communities around that. You'll be invited for more training camps in various places, and all of that plays out. And I said her because when I use a pronoun, I'm just used to using the female pronoun. But I think that's an important sort of side story, because you spoke of nature versus nurture earlier. And the question has been asked that why are there so few women players right at the top? And people from the outside might think there's men's chess, women's chess. Why are they separating chess? Actually, they're not. There's no men's chess. There is an open category where both men and women play, and then there is a women's category. And the need for this was felt a long, long time ago, because women were, not, first of all, much smaller base of women who actually played chess back in the day. So it was much harder for them to, from that smaller base, fewer people emerged. It was much harder, and therefore you had women's chess as a separate category. But it's really only relevant for world championships. In most tournaments, women and men kind of play together. And Judith Polgar was once in the world top 10. But apart from that, no woman has really reached those heights. And there have been arguments about this. Nigel Short, the grandmaster, made a controversial argument that some of it is due to nature. His argument was that, look, in things like math and chess, the average level of men and women may be equal, but the variance is higher, and therefore you will have more male geniuses and more male imbeciles. I don't really want to get into that argument. I think nature and nurture correspond in different ways. It is also true that, as an Indian parent, you are far likelier to take your young boy out traveling across the country, going to tournaments, dreaming of him being a Vishy Anand, than you are to take a young girl around, right? So all those factors come into play. But really, there is no reason to believe that women cannot also reach, these heights in chess. I remember Hu Yufan, who I think past, Polgar is the highest rated women player of India. I think at her peak she was world number 70 overall. Who Yifan at one point stopped playing women's tournament. She doesn't play the women's world championship on principle, saying I only want to play with the men. Similarly, another person I admire a lot is a Russian player called Alexandra Goryachkina. A few years ago when she was in the junior ranks, I think at the age of 14 and 15 or 15 and 16, she won the women's world junior championship. And then she said, no, I will now play with the men. And for the next in the open category, I will play with the men. And she played in the open category for the next 3 years while she was still a junior and finished in the middle of the pack. But I admire that principle. Ki no, I will only, I will not restrict myself to a women's category. And they're blazing the path. And there's no reason to believe that, so if you're watching this and you have a young daughter as well, in this regard, just treat her as having equal potential as your son, for God's sake. Right? Vaishali, who is Pragnananda's sister, is also an outstanding player. In fact, in the women's candidate that just happened, she was the one Indian playing there. Humpy also played, of course, another fine player. And I thought she'll do really well. Because all the time she's playing with this network of players, like her own brother who is at home and surely plays blitz with her all the time, and other players of that Mylapore circle, as it were. And she started the tournament badly, then won 5 games in a row, but didn't qualify. But leave that aside. So a slight digression, but there is no reason that both sexes should not do equally well in it. And it is really such a beautiful game. And I remember in my poker playing days, there was a very clear explanation for why you don't see too many women playing poker. Because when you start off, the games have such a toxic, hostile, sexist atmosphere that a woman sitting with 8 men who are gradually getting drunk and who are gradually going on tilt and trash talking will just feel uncomfortable. It's a toxic atmosphere. So you kind of understood that they selected themselves out and said, I want no part of this. In chess, there's no reason for that. Chess is a beautiful, civilized world with really decent people, and it's possible to rise very far.
Okay, and last, I want to go to the particle physics and politicians question.
ये कहाँ से आ गया chess episode में? Well done though. Please continue.
That if India has 84 grandmasters and the United States has 101, rough parity. Okay, admittedly a larger population, but rough parity. Then does that mean that it is now possible to have a similar number of particle physicists, or a similar number of great politicians, or a similar number of business people or poets or whatever? And I think the question turns on the dials that have to be turned. So far we've said nature and nurture are 2 knobs, but nurture is a
knob, nurture turns it.
Yes, but there is a complicated combination of family and community and culture, which comes together to make all these things possible. So it is one thing to be able to grow a chess player. It is one thing to be able to grow an IPL player. Okay, and we have seen individuals from very underprivileged backgrounds come and rise and triumph in IPL. Okay, because it's a certain package of skills and capabilities, and without needing to be condescending, I want to say it's a simpler package of skills, because you don't require the richness and complexity of culture. Whereas many of the other aspects of life require an extremely complex package of knowledge and of culture. So I think we should think of our society today, we should think of India today as having varying levels of ability to process the raw talent. Okay, so to switch completely to an opposite level, in my organization XKDR Forum, and before that I used to be at NIPFP, to a very big extent I consider these organizations to be talent factories, to be leadership factories. We took in some very cool people and then we added value to them. So they were very smart, very cool people before they stepped in our door, and we added value to them. And it makes me think that how many organizations are there where that kind of value addition happens, where people really jump in their depth and breadth of knowledge, where they get peers, where they get community. And the answer is not a whole lot. There are very few healthy organizations in India where there is the pursuit of knowledge and capability in a way that is not very instrumental, that people are pursuing simpler goals of getting into a PhD program or getting a pub, as opposed to actually learning how to think about the world. They are different. So I think there are very few organizations in India that are able to incubate this talent pool and create the next generation of leaders. And in the world that I inhabit, the package of knowledge of culture is extremely complicated. So I think that every capability, every kind of occupation, every kind of job role, as it were, requires a different journey from raw DNA to some amount of nurture to mind-blowing outcomes. And there's a spectrum of these use cases. So there are some things where a person growing up under very hostile circumstances in remote parts of India is just born with the right DNA and manages to come out, and that's more like a cricket and IPL thing. To a greater extent, I feel chess is harder than that. It requires more culture, more socialization, more community, more ability to interoperate with very smart people. And then there are many, many other lives where even greater things are required. I want to flip this around and think about the great Indian services export revolution. A lot of the roles where India is extremely successful in services exports are actually those simpler use cases, where a person may have a very underprivileged background, gets a very basic level of knowledge, frankly, not on the journey to innovation and leadership and strategic thinking and contributing to the complexities of organizations, but they fit in as a cog in the machine for a global organization. So the global organization has the culture, has the strategy, has the richness and complexity of being an organization, of possessing organization capital. And the greatness of organizational capital is that you are able to utilize a cog in the machine who has very narrow specialized capability, where some raw talent and some hard work and some hunger suffices. That I don't need you to do a whole lot, I need you to turn a wrench, shut up and turn the wrench. And people are very happy and proud to do that. They get a high salary by Indian standards, and lo and behold, they're producing. And that's nice, it's great. We should be thrilled in India that we got that services exports revolution, where a couple of million people are part of a globalized labor market, getting a good income, okay, leading a good life for themselves, and I'm thrilled that that happened. But we should also recognize that a lot of those roles are not cognitively complex. They are not leadership, they are not innovation, and they are not the cultural package that makes the advanced economy. So if you ask, why is the UK the UK? Why is the US the US? What makes an advanced economy? There is a huge gap between that and what we are seeing as stirrings of life in India, where very limited inputs of nature and nurture are getting us through to IPL, are getting us through to chess, are getting us through to call center operator, are getting us through to Python programmer. These are very narrow roles. They are not the same as the richness, complexity of culture, of community, of who we are with each other, how we share knowledge, how we argue with each other, our general intelligence, our cognitive complexity of being able to grapple with the world of books, to be able to think strategically. That's a very different kettle of fish, and that is abysmally rare in India because India is a poor country. So that is the meaning of development, that is the meaning of poverty. And I feel that we need to think and understand the differences between all this. That just because you've got 84 heroes who are grandmasters, it doesn't take you to 84 poets.
I think the other point I'll make here, I agree with all of these wise words, and the other point I'd make here is that sometimes when you use the word India like this, I feel uncomfortable, right? You could look at Mylapore, for example, and say it's like an OECD country. Or you could, like, a lot of the time these clusters happen kind of accidentally, right? Like Haryana has a lot of women wrestlers. Haryana also is known to be misogynist and it's very bad for its women in most other ways, but it has a lot of women wrestlers. How did this happen? Now this really happened when in the late 1970s there used to be this wrestler called Chandgi Ram. Chandgi Ram wanted sons, he didn't have sons. He had a daughter, I think Sonika Kalikaraman. And, but wrestlers would train their sons to be wrestlers like them. He didn't have any sons. And at that point, there was an accident in history that the Olympics opened up women's wrestling. And then suddenly his eyes lit up and he said, women's wrestling, I don't have a son, but I have a girl. He trained the girl and she became a wrestler. And one of Chandgiram's assistant was a gentleman named Mahavir Singh Fogat, who had three daughters, and he trained them to become wrestlers and really high quality wrestlers. And the film Dangal was made on them, for example. And that created a cluster of women wrestlers in Haryana, where there were already male wrestlers, but now women wrestlers, because of this one guy. He said, Ki, I want to live vicariously, I don't have a son, Olympics has opened up women's wrestling, I'll send my girl there. So an accident of history created a cluster. And I think of an accident of history creating a cluster, for example, of people who are not even restricted to the geography of Mylapore, I would say. It's just a cluster of educated Indians with, that kind of aspiration, looking at Vishy Anand as a hero, having access to computers, getting hooked onto chess early, entering the tournament circuit early, having parents who are supporting them, and that kind of worked out. But that is not India. That is one little cluster within India, just as the Haryana women's wrestlers are one little cluster. So there can be many little clusters, and that's the level of analysis I'm a little more comfortable with.
No, no. So I agree with everything you say. I would just layer it onto my larger story that I use the word India repeatedly. Everything you say is correct. So, what's going to happen in the future is that there will be amazing little clusters. There will be a bunch of physicists who are together, who hang out together, who go hiking together, and it will explode.
Podcasters.
There'll be a cluster of podcasters who hang out together, who talk to each other, who argue with each other, who develop their craft, who compete with each other, and it will explode. So there will be numerous little cultures that develop, and that is the pathway to excellence. And for example, I talked about organizations, that an organization is a little combination of, we hope, some very smart people who create culture. And by the way, I have a simple measure of an organization. If you are in XKDR forum, now please shut up. Little people talk about people, medium people talk about news, great minds talk about ideas. You listen, you overhear the lunch conversation. If people are talking about people, then you know that actually intellectual development has not happened. Okay, and so you see the richness of these things emerging, and as I have again and again in many conversations. I've watched lunchroom conversations in the Ministry of Finance. I've watched lunchroom conversations at NIPFP. You can see the emergence of quality, and you can see the intellectual richness developing, that when it becomes the passion and not just a job, where it's just a job, lunch is a break, and you'll discuss Bollywood. But as capability develops, the escalation of capability will happen in the lunchroom.
Twitter is people talking about people.
So Amit, tell me, you've played chess in the past. I've played chess in the past. I've completely stopped playing. I confess to occasionally solving puzzles. Do you play chess seriously anymore? Do you play like classical 40 moves, 2 hours?
No. So I stopped playing serious chess more than 30 years ago. Like I said, retired as a teenager. Decided that not for me. Early 90s, if you weren't Anand, then you couldn't make a living from chess. So I kind of gave it up, went on to other things. But chess is like an online addiction for me, and there's no way I'll ever play a 2-hour game. I play a lot of bullet. I play a lot of blitz. I have fun with those, and I don't try to improve at all. Like when I was a professional poker player, I would be working on poker all the time, trying to improve my game, spend time studying it. With chess, I don't care. There's no ego thing. I play under an this avatar nobody will ever find, not under my name. So there's nothing like that. It's just like dopamine. Dopamine hits to the brain. Bullet khelo 10 minute, blitz 3-4 game khel lo. But what gave me stimulation in recent years was playing variants. Now earlier we spoke about chess 960, but if you go on chess.com, especially as you can see on the screen now, you have these beautiful variants. And what I like about playing some of these variants is that your regular heuristics of chess don't apply. All your training, all your instincts, even your pattern recognition to a certain extent goes out of the window, because you've got to work out from first principles what is a correct way to play this particular game. And I really love that, and I would recommend that for everyone. In a couple of these games, Atomic Chess and Fog of War, for a while, I think Fog of War Rapid and Atomic Blitz, I forget exactly which, but in a couple of them, I was even #1 on chess.com for a very brief while, which gave me this little bit of ego boost, but then I fell off, so I'm nowhere on the charts now. But that jump happened where I had that intellectual thrill that I'm sorting something out from first principles. And now no one has an advantage the first time you play a new game. I'm sorting it out from first principles, figuring out what to do, getting my own heuristics right, and playing the game.
Amit, we've just finished a great episode on chess. Give us some recommendations.
So my first recommendation is a book called Game Changer by Matthew Sadler and Natasha Reagan. And this is a book they brought out after the AlphaZero revolution happened to look inside AlphaZero's games. And obviously the rules of inside the black box are not written anywhere. So you can't figure out what AlphaZero is thinking, so to say, if I may anthropomorphize. But from its play, you can realize that some of the human principles or heuristics, you might have to rethink them a little bit, tweak them a little bit. For example, the sort of the relationship between material and initiative, or play down the flanks and so on. So Sadler and Reagan in this beautiful book talk about some of those aspects, and it'll just make you a better chess player if you kind of read this as well. Fascinating read. And Gary Kasparov has a great introduction in this book, and I love the guy, and it's just a beautiful little essay on the evolution of computer chess, and everyone should read it. Kasparov also has a great book, I just remembered, called How Life Imitates Chess. So Kasparov is just a great mind, and I hope someday he succeeds in the larger game that he is playing. It's a longer game, and we need him to succeed there. My other recommendations are all YouTube based. There are two great chess vloggers I follow. One is Levi Rosman, also known as Gotham Chess. Just fantastic, right? He's a strong player himself, I think moving towards GM already in IM, and analyzes games, but builds in drama, gets a human drama, makes, you know, you feel so much smarter when you watch a Gotham Chess video, because you feel like you really understand chess like an expert. And in that moment, he really helps you do it. So it's one thing to understand chess, but it's another to communicate it in such a way that everyone gets it and is filled with the same passion and the joy of the magic that you often see on the board. So Gotham Chess does that. And there's another channel called Agod Meteor. He does the same thing. He'll play through classic games and he'll talk about that, and that's pretty wonderful. Hikaru Nakamura does a lot of streaming. Now, he's an example of a person who is kind of a loner in a sense, you know, doesn't really hang around with the community too much, even in terms of the team that he's built. It's an unconventional chess team that helps him. But incredibly strong player, one of the best players in the world, took to streaming. And during COVID, his streaming became incredibly popular, and it's great. He'll play 5-6 hours, he'll play bullet game one after another, explaining as he's playing what he is doing. At the same time, he's playing on chess.com. And it's fantastic and instructive, and perhaps a reason that revitalized his love for chess. He seemed to have kind of fallen off the wagon, but then he came back and played pretty well in the last two candidates tournaments. So Hikaru streaming is always great to watch. And finally, my biggest recommendation, and someone I admire a lot, is Sagar Shah of ChessBase India. You know, Sagar, for many years, I've seen him when the channel had practically no followers. He was running ChessBase India. ChessBase is a German kind of magazine. He took the India franchise of that, started a YouTube channel, and driven by love. It was a labor of love. He would keep talking to players, go to obscure tournaments, talk to players, analyze games with hardly any viewers. Just labor of love. And then during COVID, it really exploded. You know, there was a comedian called Samir Raina who also started doing chess streams, and then he got together with Sagar, and both the channels exploded. And ChessBase India, Sagar and his wife Amruta, they do such an incredible job in getting long deep dive interviews with players. They had a great 90-minute interview with Gukesh after he won. He goes to all the tournaments, he blogs from all the tournaments. In between games, he's talking to the players. Then during the game, he's commentating on the game and giving great insight. So Sagar and Amruta, if you're watching this, thank you so much for what you do. Every chess fan in India, believe me, you know, really appreciates it. It's just a service. And these people are also part of this brilliant chess ecosystem. Absolutely. You know, making the game alive for us, and so on. So yeah, these are my recommendations for the day.
Okay. Bye-bye, gentle reader.
Okay, we just keep all of this, right? Because we can do, yeah, so bye-bye, gentle reader. Say it in an ungentle way.
Gentle reader, bye.
You will now note that I did knight e4, threatening his bishop on d6, and he has decided to abandon his bishop. Is this some long-term positional sacrifice of which I do not see the significance?
Elementary blunder.
Or is it an elementary blunder? Right. See, I love the self-reflection. If he was a Bengali economist, he would have doubled down, and he would have said, "Now tumhe bujhte paro na. State coercion required. You know, growth China, growth China. We don't need to win the game. We will redistribute pieces at the end of it."
Stupid beyond.
And I gave him white, you will note. He had the initiative, but I have the talent. Yeah. Which achieves precisely nothing, even on the central square of D4, let me inform you. That I will of course not let you exchange it with my bishop. And I see what you wish to do. You wish to put pressure on my weak e6 pawn, which is
Easily resolved.
easily resolved. But why don't I make it more challenging for myself by
So
doing
I thought that because there is no black bishop,
yeah.
it's relatively harmless opening this up. So I was just concentrating on
This part
opening this
of
up, and I
it, yeah.
forgot to calculate.
You forgot your black bishop.
Correct. Elementary blunder.
Yeah. Oh, you did the Bengali economist egalitarian thinking. कि আমার black bishop तो नहीं, মানে এর black bishop তো নেই, আমি কেন করব? Redistribute the black bishops.
Guys, shake hands again. Great match.
Well played. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Varma.
I mean, what can I say? I feel bad beating you, but I can't help myself. I'm a man. I have to win.